And now,
it's 10 a.m.
Let's just get down to it.
And it's time for your sports fix.
Strap yourselves in, folks.
From two guys who have covered the teams you're passionate about for years.
We are professionals.
This is Jake Scott and Ben Anderson on 97.5 The KSL Sports Zone.
Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Very happy Tuesday. Ben Anderson rolling solo today with my main man, Christian Esparza. So I guess I'm not solo, but hoping to get Jake back tomorrow. And otherwise, excited for the show today. Going to have Tim LaComb join us coming up at 11 o'clock. We'll recap what he heard yesterday from Austin Ainge and what he expects to see for the Utah Jazz going forward. Also, in a moment here, going to let you hear from Austin Ainge, who was on this morning with DJ and PK. And I thought had a more illustrative conversation about kind of what he thinks about the future of the team. And again, he sounds a little bit like his father, Danny Ainge, who's been running the show for the Jazz, just not knowing exactly what is going to happen and wanting to resist the idea, I guess, of a straightforward plan, though I will tell you some of the conversations I had yesterday as we get through the show kind of gave me a little sense of what the team is planning and why, while tanking might be done, and I know that's been the big conversation of the morning, in reference to Austin Ainge's answer that the Jazz would not be tanking next year. Some of the things I think I gathered about what next year might actually look like for the Utah Jazz. So we'll break that down for you. We'll do top three stories coming up here in about 25 minutes, and we'll see. We'll see if we maybe get a surprise, throw somebody else on coming on at 11:30. But let's let you hear from Austin Ainge this morning with DJ and PK.
Time to welcome in Austin Ainge, Utah Jazz, president of basketball operations. So you made the news, you answered the question everybody wanted to hear, but that leads to a whole series of questions. Are the Jazz going to tank again? And you're very definitive in your answer there. It's already clipped in our system, and I think Yak's already played it like 3 times this morning. So that you'll hear that over and over again.
Won't see that this year.
There it is. You won't see that this year. But people wonder what that means, and I know you can't show all the cards right now, but the team could get younger. You know, you could make moves, and younger teams don't tend to win a lot. The team could win a lot more games. When you say that, what are you thinking? Where do you want to see the team to go this year? How is this likely to play out? Because taking you at face value, it could still play out several different ways.
Yeah, and I think we have to keep all of those different ways on the table. The optionality, we have to find value, and we have to make smart moves. And so I don't know how it'll play out, to be honest. It's still too early. We'll have to see what opportunities present themselves to us. But if you go back to the question that was asked before that soundbite, it was asked in a specific way, and I responded to that. We're gonna fight to the end. We're gonna let the group, that whatever group we end up with, fight, and we're gonna let Will Hardy fight and try to win and improve, and we're gonna do everything we can every night. So that's kind of the question I was answering.
It seemed like that you had prior conversation. You said it so definitively that it wasn't something that just popped into your mind, that you had previous discussions maybe along the hiring process. Is that accurate?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, obviously, these are the things you discuss when considering taking a job.
Are you worried about losing the draft pick? Much has been made of the fact that Oklahoma City, depending on how things shake out, could get that pick. How important is a pick in a draft that's supposed to be this good coming up in another year? And I realize it's a year beyond the 1 year you're scouting on right now. How big a factor is that when you're making these decisions?
It's a huge factor. It's a huge factor, but there are many other factors to consider, right? The toll it takes on a team in an organization to only think about that pick, right? The effect it has on all the other moves and decisions you make. So there are a lot of other things to consider besides the pick. The pick is really important, and obviously, it's no one wants to just give away first round picks. But there are a lot of other things to consider, and that's what we're trying to do.
The last 2 years, the Jazz have had 3 picks. I say 3 first-round picks each. I know Filipowski was early second round, but it's barely in the second round. Plus, he played like a first-rounder. I'm sure you already know that. And, we were anticipating leading up to each draft that there would be moves, but the organization chose to keep the picks, take the players. By and large, I think they've been good, and we know Taylor Hendricks had the injury. Cody Williams, he needs to literally grow up and get more just get his body in better condition to be able to compete, bigger and stronger, all those things. So it looks like you got those 6 players. Now you got a couple of picks this year in the first round. I believe you have 2 in the second, and you can't provide any definitive answers. But do you have an idea of whether those picks will be kept or maybe there's an opportunity to make moves?
I mean, I'm going to listen to everything. I just got into this job, so it's all kind of moving fast, PK. But I believe, by far the most likely scenario is we draft the picks. But you never know what offers come in. Got to stay ready.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of young guys here. Have you followed these guys yourself for a long time? I know teams scout each other. You're preparing for trades and all that. How deep a dive have you taken on Jazz players, and how much do you think you still have to learn about the current roster?
I follow them pretty close, and obviously even before they were members of the Jazz, followed them, but there's nothing like working with people every single day. So I will spend a lot of time talking with the people in the building on what they see and talking with the players themselves, right? So there's more information to be gathered for sure.
Drafting is a lot like recruiting in college, to where a coach and his staff, they have to project, because you're taking a 17, 18-year-old and you want to develop him into a 20, 21-year-old, and that could be a significant difference. Same type of concept here with the NBA draft. You're drafting maybe an 18, 19, 20-year-old, but the idea is to project it down the road when he's 24, 25, 26, and so forth. For you, how much of a challenge is that to be able to look at a kid now and have some ability to see the future and what that individual can become?
It's really hard. We all do as much work as we possibly can, and it's an educated guess. It's certainly a difficult thing. I usually tell the story of when Doc Rivers was our coach in Boston, and his son Austin Rivers was in the draft and a highly rated player, and our whole organization knew Austin since the time he was 4 years old all the way up. We'd seen everything, and we still weren't sure. Mm-hmm. That's how hard this is. Yeah. And that's why building an NBA team, you have the draft, which is hard. You're going to have some misses. It's kind of like hitting in baseball. The worst is 250 and the best is 350, right? It can be that narrow. Anyway, it can be that difficult. But you have trades and you have free agency, and so you have to kind of use all the tools to build the team, because the draft is so uncertain.
This is an odd, one-of-a-kind situation here with you following your dad, and already so many people have moved from one organization to another. But are you coming by yourself? Are you bringing other people with you? Should we expect more staff changes?
No, really happy with the staff here. And we got a draft and free agency just a few weeks away here. So I'm going to jump in with this group of which I do have a lot of previous relationships with. There's only 30 NBA teams, so we all know each other really well and deal with each other. And there are some people I've worked with previously, obviously Will Hardy, who I'm super excited to partner with. And he has a few people on his staff that that I worked with in Boston, including Joe Mazzulla's brother, the assistant general manager of the Jazz, Shane Fensky, I worked with for many years in Boston. So anyway, there's a lot of people and a lot of great people to work with, and I'm going to just roll with this group and figure it out.
Do you look for specific things when you're drafting a player, whether that be height, length, jump shot, I don't know, whatever goes into it? Is there some things that are just must-haves when you look to take a player?
There are a lot of things that you look at. I try everything I can. This is a boring answer, to not have hard and fast rules, because there are just players that break them, right? There are short players that do great. There are slow players that do great. There are non-shooters that find a way to do great. But it's really the combination. It has to add up. But character, hard work, competitiveness, I would say those types of things, the less physical measurement items I would focus on more and have a little bit stronger rules on.
Are you as patient as your dad?
I don't know how much time you've spent with him. I'm not sure I would call him patient.
In regard to making moves, he's got a reputation for waiting people out on trades and that kind of stuff. Let's just stay there.
Yeah, I mean, look, we worked together for 14 years. I found him to be pretty aggressive. But yeah, I mean, look, he drives a hard bargain in the past and all of that. And look, there are lots of things to learn there. Trades are difficult. It has to work for both teams, but I plan on being on the more aggressive side. But that can mean nothing happens for a year. It could mean something happens next month. It's just, you never know. Got to stay ready and find the right opportunities and the right value.
What's your confidence level in being able to find guys that are, not stars? You look at what the Oklahoma City Thunder have, those role players coming off the bench, Caruso and maybe even a Lou Dort, who was an undrafted free agent. I know he starts. But those types of guys, you need to have them. And I'm wondering, I've read some stuff since you got the job that you were a part of that and bringing in guys that could help you that weren't necessarily big name guys. So I'm wondering your confidence level and be able to add that to the Jazz.
That's a huge part of the job. And the other part that you didn't mention is the development by the coaching staff.
Sure.
You work together with them, and you do your best to find the diamonds in the rough and the guys who are undervalued or underdrafted, and you work with them and the coaching staff and see if you can't develop them into being winning players. But that's the job. That's the job. It's not just drafting the 5th pick overall. It's drafting the 43rd pick or the undrafted guys or the two ways and seeing if you can't find some guys. Well, we have a big staff of really smart people. We're doing everything we can to do that.
Does the world of NIL and the way things are changing college basketball, does that help you prepare? I mean, a lot of these guys are handling a lot of money, and as much as drafting is about physical, you got to get people with the right mental makeup to handle the money and the celebrity and spotlight, and college players are getting that in a way. Well, let's just say they didn't get that a couple decades ago, as you well know.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I'm not sure I've noticed a big difference yet, but we're early in this process with NIL in this era. I haven't seen it, but it's possible. It's possible they could come in a little more prepared.
Back in my beat writer days when I was with newspapers and covering teams on a daily basis, I would see guys like, as you call them, DA. They'd show up in the press room, whether it be in Las Vegas or wherever, and you'd see that they would be in-person scouting. How much do you intend to do that as far as being on the road to get your own eyewitness view of potential players?
It's what I've lived the last 17 years of my life, and I plan to continue. I believe in both. You have to watch a lot of film. But I believe in seeing in person. I think it helps. It helps me anyway. So I will do a lot of that all over the world, pounding the pavement, shaking the bushes, finding anything I can to find an advantage.
The Pacers were in the lottery just a couple of years ago, and obviously we haven't had had 6 different champions in 6 years. You have been doing this for more than a decade, but do you feel like the rules have changed, how quickly teams are being built and how short their window is to win and how quickly they're being taken apart?
Yeah, a lot of that has to do with the collective bargaining agreement. It kind of forces quicker rebuilds and quicker kind of dismantlings. You just can't spend into the tax, and they have these aprons now. So everything is a little bit different. It all happens quicker.
Well, is it fair to say it's a dream come true for you? Because I know you've worked on it for a long time, and I remember talking to you when you were a player that this is something that you wanted to do. It's really cool to see from our perspective that you got it and you put your nose to the grindstone, so to speak, and got the job done. I'm wondering if you're looking at it like that.
Absolutely, no, absolute dream come true. I've been grinding in the G League and in gyms in Serbia and Lithuania, finding guys that this is what I love. This is my passion. I'm so excited to do this with Ryan and Ashley Smith and Will Hardy and all the people in the Jazz. I've been interviewing for these jobs the last few years. I actually had some others to talk to this summer, actually. Anyway, I've been exploring and looking at these opportunities, and this one just felt right because of the people involved and the timing in my life.
Well, Austin, congratulations and good luck. And later this month, we can't wait to see what you do with the draft.
Thanks, guys. Good to talk to you again.
There he goes, Austin Ainge, the new president of basketball operations for the Utah Jazz. Really good stuff there from DJ and PK as well. I thought an interesting interview and covered a little bit more than what we were able to hear yesterday in a press conference, which is usually the case, and DJ and PK are so good at that. But I think the first question is obviously the most pressing, and is how the Jazz are going to handle tanking next year. And from conversations I had kind of behind the scenes about what the next year is going to look like for the Utah Jazz, I'm not anticipating more wins. Now, maybe more than 17, but I'm not anticipating, 27, 37, certainly not 47 wins next year from the Jazz. I still think, and as you heard Austin Ainge there talk about the value of that top 8 protected pick that they owe to the Oklahoma City Thunder in 2026, and he kind of reiterated over and over, well, you can't focus an entire season on one draft pick because of how hard that can be towards the rest of the players on the roster and everyone in the organization. It's still a very valuable asset for the Jazz, and they don't want to give away a first-round pick for nothing. So they're going to make sure they keep that pick. What I've learned is that the Jazz want to foster a more competitive environment for their young players. They want the young players to have more of a realistic shot to compete in games than maybe presented itself last year in an effort to get the number 1 overall pick and draft Cooper Flagg this season, or this summer, I should say. I think they want to have more realistic opportunities for Will Hardy to coach, for the young players to compete close, late in games, and feel like the games are a little more authentic than they were last season, which, by the way, I think is fair for fans to be able to expect that. You shouldn't go into the year expecting that your team's not going to compete. And I think the Jazz don't have a lot of appetite to repeat what last year felt like as far as how the roster was designed on a nightly basis to make sure that the young players aren't winning games or are playing but aren't really in a spot to compete. Now, as I wrote in an article yesterday at KSLSports.com, I don't think you can keep the roster. The reason the Jazz did what they did last year is because the talent on the team doesn't allow you to be competitive and still only win 25 games.
Lauri Markkanen, John Collins, Walker Kessler,
Colin Sexton,
etc.
Jordan Clarkson. Those guys play and you're going to win 30 games because we saw it each of the last 2 years. They won, was it 35 games? 30? Well, I can't remember what it was 3 years ago. Will Hardy's first season. It wasn't 37, but it was up there. It was a high number of games. They won a lot. Maybe it was 37. And then 2 years ago, they won 31 games. And it wasn't until last year that they won 17 games. So they had to really work to drop 20 wins off of their win total between the 2022-23 season to 17 wins this past year. And if they don't want to repeat what last year looked like from resting players and drawing fines from the NBA for not playing Lauri Markkanen and John Collins playing fewer than 40 games and all of that, you just can't have them on the roster. And I haven't been told that specifically, but if the Jazz are going to hold on to that top 8 pick, which probably means you can't win more than 25, 26 games, you can't do it with Lauri, and you can't do it with Collin, and you can't do it with John Collins, and you can't do it with Jordan Clarkson. You can't do it with all 4 of them, maybe 1 or 2 of them, but you certainly can't do it with all of them. And as Austin Ainge said yesterday in the press conference, we might let you hear some clips from that coming up at 11:30. It's a busy season right now. The next 3 weeks and 2 days, 23 days total to get to the NBA draft. It's open season. When the NBA finals end, they can start beginning negotiations with their own players on contract extensions. I would look at Walker Kessler as being a big name there, but also John Collins and Colin Sexton are available for contract extensions. And if those don't get done, it's probably a good sign that the Jazz are willing to move them, because why would you let them go into the final year of their contract before they become unrestricted free agents in the summer of 2026? So if they don't get a deal done with those guys to extend them, I would expect them to be on the trade block. And Lauri Markkanen was on the trade block last year. And before he signed his contract extension, and the Jazz just couldn't trade him at the deadline. Otherwise, I think they would have explored it. So these next 3 weeks are going to be pretty fascinating for the Utah Jazz, and Austin Ainge has his work cut out for him to put a roster out there that can compete without competing. Can play hard and battle in games and let Will Hardy actually, cut his teeth even further in his 3rd year in the NBA without threatening to lose that top 8 pick. And I think that's what next season is going to look like, and I would imagine it will be more digestible from Jazz fans who watch every night. The fans who don't want to watch every night because they don't want to watch a team that's not going to the playoffs, which I think is totally understandable, I think are still going to be critical of the team and be frustrated that the team isn't more competitive. But I think you're going to see a better, more authentic product next year than what you saw last year with the tanking and the chicanery that you saw from trying to lose games to get a draft pick. And that was kind of what I gathered yesterday without any specific real conversations about who would get traded or how they would get traded or what they would look for in return. But you would imagine it would be younger players or future draft assets that don't impact the team's ability to win today. So we will talk more about Austin Ainge throughout the day. We'll talk to Tim LaComb coming up at 11 o'clock. Top 3 stories coming up next. Stick around. More Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I present...
This is JJ and Alex.
Travis Yost, he writes for TSN.
What a great gift it is for the Mammoth to get that number 4 overall pick. Do they really need that number 4 overall pick?
You're either drafting best available here and reloading the coverage, which may make sense. The second option is, do I find a team that's in some organizational distress and looking to make changes and maybe looking to move off a player that may not make sense for them anymore, but may make more sense for Utah? When you're trading the number 4 overall pick, you don't have to add a lot of sweeteners. That's how valuable that pick is. If Utah is willing to swallow it and say, hey, look, we'll move off our first rounder this year, that is going to be very interesting to teams. So I think that option, until they actually make the selection, that option is going to be on the table.
Catch JJ and Alex afternoons from 3 to 6. Presented by G2G Bars on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Whether it's the Jazz, Utes, Cougars, or Aggies, these guys have got you covered.
Time to eat, fellas.
You're locked on to Jake Scott and Ben Anderson.
1, 2, 3, move it.
On 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. A very happy Tuesday. Tomorrow is Wednesday, and win big every Wednesday on the KSL Sports Zone with Win Ticket Wednesday. This Wednesday, win tickets to Aerofest with Styx, Kevin Cronin, the former lead singer of REO Speedwagon, and Don Felder, formerly of the Eagles, coming up June 11th at Utah First Credit Union Amphitheater. Tickets are on sale now at livenation.com, or listen to the KSL Sports Zone all day tomorrow for your chance to win. We're also doing the Radiothon tomorrow, which is a very cool opportunity to raise money for kids here in the state of Utah. So all the shows, well, starting with our show tomorrow, going to be downstairs around all the other radio stations here in this cluster, raising money for kids. So a very cool opportunity. But Win Ticket Wednesday tomorrow, also going on, your chance to check that out from our friends at Aerofest. All right, Christian, let's get to the top 3 stories brought to you by our friends at J. Brooks Jewelers. Go check them out 2 locations up and down the Wasatch Front. J. Brooks Jewelers. What's number 1?
Number 1, Ben, 3 weeks until the NBA draft, and there's a lot of work to do for the new man at the top, Austin Ainge.
I've always believed, and we've always done it, where you evaluate everyone, the whole draft. You never know what trades come in on the clock. So I've definitely spent a lot of time. I interviewed most of these young players at the combine already. I've put in the time all year on these guys. So I feel prepared, but certainly we'll crunch, and I can't wait to learn from all the great people in the Jazz organization and get their input and think through it. Big decisions. There'll be trade conversations, all these things. It's a very active time of year. So we got a lot to prepare for.
One of the big questions for Austin and the Jazz going into it, and Ryan Smith answered it right off the bat. Again, we might hear some sound coming up at 11:30 from yesterday's presser, was that Austin Ainge is going to have what Ryan called final recommendation, which is, Ryan has to sign off on everything. He's the boss. He owns the team. But Ryan is going to have finals, or Austin's going to have final say to Ryan on kind of what the decision or what the best decision would be from the team. And that's very interesting with the draft coming up in 22 days from right now, coming up on June 25th is the first day of the draft, and it goes into the second round on day 2. Over the last year, we knew the Boston Celtics were going to be good. So Austin Ainge, I'm sure, has been more focused on the latter half of the draft, trying to prioritize who the Celtics would pick there. Now he's got a top 5 pick that falls into his lap, and he's got to figure out what to do there. And I think what's interesting to look at with Austin and with the Celtics specifically, even since Danny Ainge has left, is what types of players they have targeted since Danny moved over to the Jazz. And I guess Danny's last year, but where Austin Ainge has been doing a lot of work was in 2020 with the Celtics. And they drafted Aaron Nesmith, who's now making a huge impact for the Indiana Pacers, and Peyton Pritchard. But if you looked at those two players coming out of the draft, and in fact, they drafted Desmond Bane with the 30th pick. That was a very good draft for them. But they traded Desmond Bane to Memphis on draft night. Nesmith and Pritchard were arguably the two best shooters in that draft. Aaron Nesmith was absolutely knockdown player in college, as was Peyton Pritchard. We remember at Oregon, Nesmith went to Vanderbilt, but that was kind of their calling card. Those guys could really, really shoot the ball. And then when you get to their next first-round pick, the Celtics haven't had another first-round pick until just last year. They didn't have one in 2022, 2021, or 2023. And they took Baylor Shireman out of Creighton. And Baylor Shireman out of Creighton was also maybe in the conversation for the best shooter in the draft. Now, when you're a team like the Celtics and you're competing for a championship and you're just trying to improve on the edges, one of the best ways to do that is to just add shooters, is to add guys who step in and create space for your stars and make their life easier. And I think that makes sense. But it probably also gives you a little bit of an understanding of what Austin Ainge values in the draft. He's looking at shooters. He likes guys who can shoot, and he believes, even though he kind of resisted answering the question of what specifically is a must-have for players in his conversation with DJ and PK, because you don't want to say, well, I'm not going to draft a guy because he's slow, because there's good slow players in the NBA, or I don't want to draft a guy who's small because there's good small players in the NBA. But he has favored shooting. And you look at the 5th pick the Utah Jazz have, and it's right where the two best shooters in the draft are going to fall, and that's Con Knippel and Trey Johnson out of Texas. I think those guys are going to get very serious looks from the Jazz. I think they were going to get very serious looks from the Jazz, regardless of who was going to be making this pick, whether it was Danny Ainge or Justin Zanuck or now Austin Ainge coming in. Those were going to be some of the best players available. But you look at what Austin Ainge has looked at and who's going to be on the board, and I think it really trends towards those two players. So while there's names like Ace Bailey or VJ Edgecombe, and maybe if they fall to 5, the Jazz just take them and they say there's just too much value there to pass on. And again, when you're talking about drafting for the Celtics and trying to add spacing versus trying to add a potential star player for the Jazz, it's a different conversation. But shooting is something I would circle as maybe a must for the Jazz, and why some of these other names coming up in the draft, like a Jeremiah Fears, the guard from Oklahoma, who just doesn't shoot the ball well at all, may not be in this conversation.
One thing I wonder, too, that I'm curious about is how he said he's already done homework on a lot of the players in this draft at the top even.
Yeah.
I wonder if Jason Tatum's injury played into that at all, as far as, okay, what can we do? What were the Celtics preparing to do as far as every option being on the table?
Sure.
Maybe trading away a Jaylen Brown. Not saying that they're going to do that, but that's something that a good front office would prepare for if they end up getting a top pick.
I've talked to front office people who are like these real legit decision makers, like the guys who are on draft night making the call. And they have said, we have teams of salary cap people that explore truly every opportunity there is to make a trade of any kind in the NBA. And I know people get on Fanspo or whatever the ESPN trade machine and mess around and like to put out these crazy hypotheticals, and everyone shoots them down on the internet. The funny thing is, those have been made by every front office on every team with every single player on their roster and every player on every other roster as well. They play with the trade machine. They probably got their own technology to do it, but they go out and not only have they done it, but they did it 6 months before you thought about it. They are, because they have millions of dollars on the line, and for the owners, billions of dollars on the line, they are thinking about it the same way fans do. How do you improve the team? What's available? What's out there? How do you get better? How do you find, better deals on the edges? How can you take advantage of another team? What's a win-win trade look like? How do you maintain flexibility in the future? So they do all of those things. So yes, to your point, Christian, they looked at, hey, what if Jaylen Brown gets us a top 5 pick in this year's draft? What if we were to trade him? And then we don't want to be caught with our hands in our pockets, so we want to make sure that we know who those top 5 players are in case Jaylen Brown's not on the roster, because there's just a can't-miss trade here that we have to take back. So they do. They do all the work. They do certainly put themselves in a spot where they're prepared for all potential outcomes. And so while I believe Austin Ainge that, he's familiar with these guys in the top of the draft and they scout those guys, and it's just hard to miss them, because if you're watching some of the other second-round picks that are going to come out of Duke, you're inevitably going to see Con Knippel. Or if you're looking in the SEC to watch other players that might have been available around 28, where I think the Celtics are drafting, 27, wherever the Celtics are drafting, you've also seen Trey Johnson playing at Texas. So they have done that work, and then you go to the Combine. And the other thing to note is they saw all these kids at the AAU level, when they didn't know if they were going to be a top 5 pick, but they were a top 15, top 10 recruit. And they've been following them, these players since they were 15, 16 years old. And now they're 19 and 20 and entering the draft. So there is that familiarity there, but I'm sure the priority of the tape he's watching changes dramatically over the next 3 weeks. And we'll learn a lot about the team, of what they do over the next 23 days, 22 days leading up to the draft, because there's a lot of decisions that have to be made. And Austin Ainge said that. All right, number 2.
Number 2, Utah football flips 2026 linebacker LaGary Mitchell from Boise State.
I try to not buy too much into a year from now, which is unfortunate. And I think it's one of the real losses in college football is, looking at recruiting and National Letter of Intent Day, used to be such a big celebratory day. And until it's the actual day that they're jumping on campus, until it's for that actual season that they're committing to your program and they're going to be around, this is a placeholder. The same way Boise State had this kid coming in as a placeholder of somebody they thought might be on the roster as soon as 2026, which is still next season. And Utah now has to play defense for a year. And even then, you probably don't play that good a defense because you're still looking to recruit over top of him. You're still out there looking to bring in another player. But he is an Idaho native who had committed to Boise State. And we'll see. Boise State going to the Pac-12. We'll see if that ends up drawing any players or allows them to avoid or prefer playing at some of those schools, Utah State included, versus feeling like they absolutely have to go to a Big 12 school or an ACC school. Other news this morning coming out on the recruiting front was Cal ended up keeping a top 100 recruit, an inside offensive lineman who had come to Utah, had come to BYU, had visited at Oregon, was kind of a big-time recruit, and chose to stay at Cal. Now, it's his home school, it's close to home, but he doesn't take an opportunity to go play in the Big Ten with Oregon. He chose to stay at Cal, and maybe that's because it's home, or maybe that's because they had a lot of money to offer him, or maybe he's comfortable playing in the ACC. The recruiting landscape is changing pretty quickly. I actually think, in a sense, you're allowing players to get more of what they want as an individual versus saying, hey, I wanted to play in the Pac-12 my whole life, so I was going to commit to a Pac-12 school because my dad dreamed of that growing up. And so I'm going to follow my dad's dreams and pick that school because it's in the conference he wanted to play in or he was a fan of. I think you've got more players choosing, what's better for them individually. Generally, that's due to the financial aspects of it as well. But they're picking more for themselves than the school because they know they're probably going to have 2 or 3 cracks at the bat to pick the school they want to play for, because while they may commit one time or go to school for 1 year at one spot, they may end up somewhere else by their sophomore or junior year. All right, 3rd.
Number 3, the Stanley Cup Finals are set, Ben. They begin tomorrow night. We've got a rematch. Edmonton Oilers taking on the Florida Panthers.
I'm not trying to compare the NHL and the NBA, but I know there has been some conversation, especially locally, about, what's the better product? And the NHL does X, Y, and Z, and the parity is there, and that's fun, and the NBA doesn't provide that. Am I wrong? This is the third straight year the Panthers are in the Stanley Cup, and this is a rematch of last year. This is actually the type of parity the NBA has finally found a way to break away from after 9 straight years of LeBron being in every finals. And if it, what was it? It felt like 5 out of 7 years it was LeBron versus the Warriors in one aspect or another. The NBA is breaking out of this parity. We saw, Dallas in the finals last year, and now we get OKC and Indiana in the finals this year, and Minnesota had a chance to make it, and Denver won it 2 years ago, and Milwaukee has a title, and Toronto has a title. You're starting to see some of these, kind of familiar teams in the NHL carve out a niche as really having dynastic runs, and the Panthers are certainly doing that right now. I know I caught some heat last year from rooting for the Oilers to win this series. I'm still rooting for the Oilers. I like Connor McDavid a lot. I'd like to see them break through. And I don't like dynasties. I'd like to break up dynasties, especially as we're now watching a team that has never had any real success at the NHL level, certainly in the Stanley Cup playoffs. I would love to see more parity, and I love the direction that the Utah Hockey Club, or actually now the Utah Mammoth, is heading, and I'd like to see them break into this. Have
you heard all the hubbub about Florida with the tax advantage and being able to basically get players on cheaper deals?
It's more pertinent, I would imagine, in the NHL than it is in the NBA. Now, it's a little unique in the NBA because there's only one Canadian team, but we know taxes in Canada are through the roof, right? It's very high. It's how the country is designed. It's how their tax system works to provide different things to their people. Florida doesn't have any income tax. So if people don't know this, you actually pay taxes in every city you play in as a professional athlete. So but you play 82 games. So 41 of your games are at home, plus whenever you play Tampa or when you play, is there any other teams in Florida, whatever, you don't pay income taxes in those. There's a couple of other states that don't do it as well. Texas, I think so. Maybe Dallas is the same way. There's an advantage there. Certainly. It's why I think some players have been hesitant to go play in Toronto in the NBA. But there are so many Canadian teams in the NHL that I bet there is an advantage of where you want to play. But then if you want a warm weather city, you get narrowed down relatively quickly. I think, California still has very high taxes. And a lot of these guys are Canadian. That's the funny thing. It's not like these American-born or I should say, United States-born players. They're Americans if they're not born in the U.S. I don't know if they have real strong connections to the cities here, or they romanticize the cities that we do necessarily. So, they may want to be warm and may want to pay low taxes. So you'll be willing to go live and play for the Florida Panthers with an opportunity to win there. And, they've built a dynasty, so good for them.
I just think it's a silly talking point when they're playing a Canadian team.
Yeah,
in
they
the
are
finals,
playing a Canadian
right?
team. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the advantage the Canadian teams have is where we talk about American players born in the U.S., especially in the NBA, may want to play in some of these, bigger cities, specifically New York, Los Angeles, Dallas even. Canadian players are willing to play in Canada. I think there's a real thing about being able to play and represent your country or a team from your country, especially if it's from, one of the territories that you grew up in. I think that's a big deal for some of these players. So that's an advantage. So maybe if you're going to be playing in the U.S. anyways, you might as well play for the place where you at least get a tax advantage. You might as well play the place where it is the most financially advantageous for you. So Florida could have an upper hand there while Canadian players are willing to just stay in Canada because that's what they've done their whole life. But rooting for Edmonton. That drop the puck tomorrow at 6 p.m. And then, of course, Thursday, the NBA Finals start. And I'm excited for both series. I'm excited for both of these, and it should be fun. And, again, playoff hockey is about as good as it gets. So fun to watch and fun to have some touch points and some reference points of having seen these players and these teams come through Salt Lake City. Top 3 stories brought to you by our friends at J. Brooks Jewelers. Cherish your loved ones with J. Brooks Jewelers. Explore our expertly crafted engagement rings made from the finest materials. jbrooksjewelers.com. All right. More Jake and Ben. Coming up next, stick around, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
This is DJ and PK.
Time to welcome in Austin Ainge, Utah Jazz president of basketball operations.
Is it fair to say it's a dream come true for you? Because I know you've worked on it for a long time, and I remember talking to you when you were a player that this is something that you wanted to do. You put your nose to the grindstone and got the job done. I'm wondering if you're looking at it like that.
Absolute dream come true. I've been grinding in the G League and in gyms in Serbia and Lithuania, finding guys. This is what I love. This is my passion. I'm so excited to do this with Ryan and Ashley Smith and Will Hardy and all the people in the Jazz. I've been interviewing for these jobs the last few years. I actually had some others to talk to this summer. I've been exploring and looking at these opportunities, and this one just felt right because of the people involved and the timing in my life.
Catch DJ and PK mornings from 6 to 10 on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. The sports you love, the teams you can't live without.
Get a sense of urgency!
This is Jake Scott and Ben Anderson on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
I think this is a great place, and I think you build it the right way. Like I said, stacking good decisions over and over and over. And players want hope. They want to win. They want great culture. They want great coaching. They want great teammates. So that's what we have to give them.
Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Segment brought to you by Peach Doors and Windows. Amazing home transformations begin with Peach Doors and Windows, where 5-star reviews are the norm. Give them a call today for your free in-home estimate, 801-566-1255. It's 801-566-1255. That's Austin Ainge, the new president of the Utah Jazz, letting you hear sound throughout the show. Introduced yesterday by Ryan Smith and the team that was on with DJ and PK this morning. If you missed it, go check it out at 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone, or KSLSports.com. And that's a big question. How are you going to attract players to Utah? And, you know, they face some similarities. There are stereotypes, rightfully so, for both Boston and Utah, that they are overwhelmingly white towns, and that white players have made up their rosters for long periods of time. Obviously, that's less prevalent in Boston, but it's been a reputation that they've had. And it's certainly a reputation that, you know, maybe it's just fans, but players have had it as well, about Utah and how you attract players to Utah. I think he's right. I think if you win, players want to play for you. And I think players are happy to come and play in Utah if you can find opportunities to win. And with the modern NBA and how quickly teams, you know, jump up and compete, and you have an opportunity to compete in smaller towns like Denver, like Milwaukee, like Oklahoma City, like Indiana now, I do think this continues to favor the Jazz, and players recognize that with shorter contracts, you're just not, quote unquote, stuck anywhere in the NBA long. You're not planting your roots in a spot where you're going to be there forever. I was talking to some people yesterday about, you know, who's been in the Jazz organization for a long time, and Jim Olsen, the president of the team, has been there for 20 plus years, and Justin Zanuck's been there for 12, and we were joking that, you know, Jordan Clarkson's been there forever. He's been with the Jazz since 2019. You know, like, it's not that long. It's a while. It's a while in the modern NBA, but that's the point. Like, Jordan Clarkson, as far as players with specific teams and tenure, he's got to be close to top 15 in the NBA, top 20 in the NBA. You know, you look at the dynasty that the Warriors had, and they've had a lot of guys stick around for a while. But as far as players who have been on one roster since 2019, especially players who weren't drafted by those teams, it's pretty unique to be traded to a team and sign 2 contracts with them, as Jordan Clarkson has been. So I just don't think you're seeing a hesitancy and a resistance to playing in certain markets that maybe existed when championship windows for teams would open up and stay there for 7 years. And if you got yourself into the wrong town or the wrong team and organization that wasn't going to be competing, you were just stuck there. With 3-year contracts being the overwhelming, you know, majority of deals that are signed, and a lot of 2-year deals, I just don't think that's as big of an issue as it once was. And so I think you're going to see a different type of player that comes through Utah. And I mean, you know, quality of player, tier of player that might be willing to come in and test it out for a few seasons versus feeling like, man, is this a place I'm going to have to go where I'm going to retire? I don't think that's the issue.
No, and like you said at the very beginning, what it boils down to is the culture and winning. I think that's how you get started, and that's what Austin Ainge wants to do, and that's what he wants Will Hardy to do, and that's why they kept Will Hardy around, is because they believe he can establish that culture that's going to attract, ultimately, players to want to come here, whether they are stars or role players. but they're going to play a part in the winning.
And, Austin's 44. Will Hardy's 37 now, somewhere in that range. Like, there's a lot of runway with this franchise. I mean, how old's Ryan Smith? He's not very old. He's not 50. So you've got a lot of runway with these guys as that kind of being the three faces. And Justin Zanuck as well. I want to throw Justin Zanuck in this conversation. It really sounds like he's going to be around the Jazz, for the long haul, and I think he wants to see this through. This is a group that's going to be consistent going forward. So if you come to Utah, I don't think there's going to be a lot of turnover. I don't think there's going to be a lot of dramatic changes. And the Jazz have never really been known for that. But you've got young people in place that if you're a player, you're going to come in and have an opportunity to grow with. And I think that can be appealing for certain types of players. We will talk about that more and the hiring. Coming up with Tim LaComb. He's going to join us in the next segment. Stick around. More Jake and Ben coming up next. 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Who's got it better than us? Nobody! Your home for the best sports coverage in Utah. You're listening to Jake Scott and Ben Anderson on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. A very happy Tuesday to everybody out there. Nominate the youth sports volunteer that you know for the Hercules Hero of the Week. Submit your nomination at kslsports.com/contest. And listen every Thursday afternoon to JJ and Alex for the winner. Help us celebrate the efforts of those volunteers making an impact with Hercules Hero of the Week, sponsored by Hercules First Credit Union and Beehive Meals. Let's welcome in our next guest, longtime coach in the area at both Utah and BYU, and an NBA insider on the pre-half and post-game show with Jake Scott. It is Coach Tim LaComb. What's going on, Coach?
What's up, my guy? How are you?
I'm doing terrific. Always happy to talk to you and get Jake out of the way so we can really talk.
I had a great conversation at length, because those are the types of conversations you have with David Locke. But in the conversation, he sang your praises.
Oh, very nice of him. Saw
what
David
a great
yesterday.
job you're doing, and I just think he likes the fact that you're in his tree. I guess he kind of helps you get on at Locked On, and I was an intern for him, so he hangs those trophies on his mantle, I guess.
We're both hanging from his mantle.
Yep.
Let's hope that's the only place we're hanging.
Well, that's why, I like you for a lot of reasons, but that's another one. You had to put up with him.
Yeah, that's where I got my start, at working on Jazz broadcasts with Locke.
The best. I love that guy.
So, Austin Ainge, I know you've been on the station in the last day or two, but what's your history with Austin, and how well do you know him?
Knew Austin really well. Actually was at Utah when Austin played, so coached against him, and we beat him in I think his senior year in the Mountain West Conference tournament down in Denver on a very notorious moving screen by Ricky Johns that freed Luke Neville for a layup. That when I got down to BYU the next year, that's what everybody talked about, was how bad that the missed call was. But got to see Austin, as a competitor. And I would say as a player, his best asset was his mind. I think he was skilled and he worked really hard at it, but I think he had a little bit of the Jokic, vision, and could really see the floor and execute plays. Had a successful time, and BYU was really good while he was there. And so then he took that, went to Southern Utah, and he was a coach at Southern Utah. I believe my first year at BYU, he was at Southern Utah with Roger Reed. And so we saw a bunch of each other on the road, talked a ton, and really kind of developed a relationship. And then when his younger brother, Cooper, was in high school, we went out to see him, and so I spent some time, and then we'd gone back a couple of times. But through the years, we've always maintained dialogue, and I'm really happy for his success, and I really am excited. I think it's a forward-thinking move by the Jazz.
Did you think it was inevitable that Austin would get a job like this, whether it was in Utah or elsewhere?
Absolutely. I believe that was his track. I think in talking to people around the league over the years, as they come through, his name comes up. I mean, I think he's done a really good job at identifying talent. And, as he said in the interview today, not necessarily that top rung talent, but really putting rosters together. And I think that is the modern day NBA. If you look at You know, 10 years ago, you could put LeBron and Kyrie and a bunch of, you know, derelicts out there and win the title. But I think, you know, nowadays it is about your depth in a lot of ways, the way the game's being played, the pace, the shooting. So you've got to have kind of utility guys. And I see Oklahoma City's roster, and I kind of feel like that's what they've done last offseason, getting Caruso and Hartenstein. I think that was like that move when they made it, you know, it was just kind of out in the universe. But that signaled to me that those guys were ready to make a move, because they went out and found two guys that were identical to their culture and fit, you know, roles. And we've seen that come to fruition. So putting teams together is the new way, you know, figuring out the top end, the middle, and the lower end guys, and trying to make the best roster you can.
I think looking at what they've done in Boston specifically, and you look at how savvy the Drew Holiday move was, but even before that, you know, Derek White was such a good acquisition. And guys who were, first of all, I don't think anybody thought Drew Holiday had a chance of ending up in Boston until Milwaukee traded him to Portland. And then all of a sudden it felt like the stars aligned, and that felt like a realistic opportunity for them. I just kind of get a sense the way Boston has operated building their rosters out, especially since Danny has left, it just feels like there's a really good feel for what's going on around the league and the opportunities to find guys who just make you better. And I wonder if that's the same approach that's going to come to Utah.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head. I think that's exactly it. And obviously Justin and Danny have done a great job, you know, on the front end of this. And they'll obviously be in the room, and their opinions and comments and everything hold a ton of weight. But I do think, you know, having somebody that has actually, you know, recently gone through the process of making that one move, you know, I do believe that Holiday move was the move for them. But you go back, I mean, getting Horford to come back was huge. And so there are all of these little nuanced moves, and I think that's where Austin specializes. You know, I tell the story all the time. When I was at BYU, he would call me, and he's like, hey, I got a list of guys you need to call from out here. They're going to be really good. They're only ninth graders, but Nerlens Noel, Michael Carter-Williams, George Niang. So, I mean, I was calling these guys in the ninth grade because Austin saw them and saw that they were going to – obviously Nerlens Noel was a well-known guy, but he got into the weeds, and he would open up some doors for us that we had hard times getting into. So his ability to see talent is really impressive, and I think that's going to serve him well here.
I don't know if it's going to work, but one of the things that I think is the better option of the two, and I don't know if this other option was ever really tenable, other than it had kind of been mentioned in you know, speculation of mostly media or fans, was that the Jazz would build a roster, go through this rebuild, and then as soon as they were ready to win, they were going to move on from Will Hardy and get a more experienced coach. And essentially, Will had to be the sacrificial lamb for development, and then they got to a place where they could win, and they brought in somebody else. They've actually kind of done something unique, which is Danny Ainge, whether he knew it's what he was doing or not, has kind of taken on that role of the sacrifice, right? He saw the dismantling of this team with Rudy and Donovan. He's drafted a bunch of these players. They hit rock bottom, I would think, last year, winning only 17 games, having the worst record in the NBA. How difficult specifically last season felt for, I think, everybody involved. And now, you know, you look at his timeline, I just don't, as much as nobody's going to push Danny Ainge out, and that's not what the Jazz are doing by any means, Austin Ainge probably gets to do the more fun part, which is actually spending some of this money and building these pieces, as opposed to Will Hardy kind of having to be the guy who was the one who was sacrificed and put out to pasture.
I think that's a great take. And you know, to that point, I've heard through the years, you know, a lot of things said about Will Hardy, but from somebody that's watched every game he's coached, you know, since he's been here, I think he really understands this new age. And I think he is I think he's an incredible coach, you know, X's and O's. I mean, we see that with some of the sets after timeouts and start games and, you know, throughout the process. But I think his real skill is he's a connector. I talked with Mark Few about him, and, you know, Mark he just sang his praises because he's a guy that when people see him, they smile. Because I think he's an authentic person. I think when he goes into the press conferences or goes in front of his team, there's not shtick. He's telling you his thoughts, and I think that authenticity is really important in today's game, especially with these young guys. And so I think that's right on the head. I think Will Hardy was brought here, with the intention of starting it and finishing it. And obviously the Jazz have made a huge commitment to him, which I'm glad to see. But I think Will, I'm really glad that, that he's going to have some runway here. And as we start to kind of build, we can see some more things that he can do with a more talented roster. And I do think runway is an important key of what we learned yesterday. You look at a 44-year-old now president of basketball operations, which is young. That's pretty young to have that big of a role in the NBA. A lot of these guys, even Dennis Lindsey was pretty young when he got hired. He might have been 50. He might have almost been 50, but you've got a young person in Austin Ainge and a very young head coach still in Will Hardy. It feels like this is the future of the team. As much as we talk about the draft picks, the young players, etc., the culture is going to be set by the owner, the head coach, and the front office, the main front office member. And it feels like they've kind of got those three pieces in place. I agree. I think I think their connection too in Boston is really important. The way they work together, the way they already talked about each other. It's a unique relationship. For sure. But I think the fact that they've got history and familiarity, and Austin is, like I talked about Will, Austin's, like I said, through the years, even in his capacity, I'll get a text from time to time. So he's a people person. He's great at what he does, and I think they'll be a good team. What do you know about the Boston culture? For so long, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot with it, we know kind of what, if you were trying to replicate what San Antonio had done, you kind of knew the types of people you were getting. And ironically, Boston is an offshoot of a lot of San Antonio people with Ime Udoka and certainly Will Hardy coming from that cycle as well. But what do you get? You've known Danny for a long time. You've known Austin for a long time. You've known people in that Boston circle. What is there a value system or anything you would say is like a kind of a defining factor? I think that I went back there twice to watch training camp. First time Shaq was on the team, and that was fun. I put my foot in his shoe, and it was with nuts. Your shoe on, yeah, probably with my shoe on. Yeah. I mean, it was a 22, bro. It was the biggest thing I'd ever seen. And so I went back once, and Doc was the coach. I went back the second time to their new facility, and Brad was the coach. And, the cool part was when they brought coaches in, we were there with other college coaches. I think Nate Oates was there when we were there he was at Buffalo at the time, now at Alabama. But the cool part was, I think there is an openness and authenticity to their program. I think, Brad's a straight shooter and a brilliant basketball guy. I think he showed at Butler his ability at a mid-major to take a team to the championship with a bunch of guys that nobody wanted. So it's an eye for talent and the ability to coach it. So I would say that greatness is their culture, and I think they aspire to that. It was interesting because it was the year Kyrie joined the Celtics, and it was pretty evident that it wasn't going to work just by his attitude, in the first few days. But, those are things you live and learn. But I think that would be what I would say. I would say that their culture is they want to be great. And I hope that, the Jazz, obviously, as you said, bottomed out last year, but that's their goal too. And Ryan talks about that all the time. Austin did say a word that you don't hear a lot of general managers, presidents of basketball operations, CEOs, VPs say, and he said trade a lot. And he wasn't just talking about the ability to trade the draft pick. He said, the next 3.5 weeks leading up to the draft are busy, and they've got to figure out what they're going to do with that 5th overall pick if they make the 5th pick. I think Ryan Smith said if 5th is where they're picking. But he kind of mentioned the idea of making trades, and you go back and you tie it in with the, we're not going to be tanking next year comment.
I just think they're still not going to win a lot of games. They're going to want to prioritize getting a good draft pick again next year, but they don't want to tank and make it feel like last year. It makes me feel like there's going to be trades this year and this summer, and certainly more than maybe we even saw last year, where it was teased so much with Lauri Markkanen but didn't come to fruition, and most of the roster stayed intact. Do you think you're going to see a pretty dramatically made-over roster next season?
I would bet so. Just the vibe I'm getting. And I also believe it's, on some of the veterans, even the Jazz had a tough year. Some of those guys really had great years. I still can't believe somebody didn't go for John Collins at the deadline the way he was playing. But so I think that's what they're going to assess is what kind of value could they get in return. How impactful could that be for next year? We'll wait and see. But I think I do get the vibe it's going to be vastly different.
I look at guys like Obi Toppin in Indiana who are just having good years and are really performing well after being kind of cast off out of New York. And I just think that's a John Collins type player. Or you look at Colin Sexton. It's hard to find an exact match for Colin, but teams need point guards. They need veterans who can step in and play and aren't costing $35 million. He's only making 18 or 19 next year. That's value. That's a lot. I know he's going to barely make it. It seems like those guys with expiring deals, and again, you're not really married to them for a long time, but you can audition them for a season on teams that I think can win. I just think those guys are going to have more value this year than maybe they even did at this point last season.
I totally agree. I think we talked about it. The way you build a roster is you get those valuable pieces that are efficient and affordable, and then they play above their weight. And I talked about John, but Collins, another guy who. You talk about a guy who the minute he comes out on the court, it's in a dead sprint to the ball rack, and he's pretty locked in the rest of the night. And that's hard to find in the NBA. So it's a real quality, a hard-playing guy that has really improved in its time here in Utah. I think we've got a much better Colin Sexton right now than, he had to work through some of that. And Will Hardy did a great job of mentoring him through it. Yeah, those are the things that kind of hang out there, and it's a business. So we talk about it, but I really have enjoyed watching this group of guys, albeit through tough circumstance, kind of develop and grow.
It's interesting to look back at the draft picks Austin Ainge has been involved with really over the last, let's say, decade for the Celtics, and when they've had a top 5 pick. They've hit grand slams. They took Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, who have both turned into, if not superstars, good enough to win titles and win finals MVPs and make multiple All-Star games. And then when they've had picks in the latter half of the draft, specifically late in the draft, they've really circled in on shooting. You look at Aaron Nesmith with the 14th pick, Peyton Pritchard with the 26th pick, Baylor Shireman last year, who I know we talked about with the 30th overall pick. They like kind of big, versatile forwards in the top 5, or they like shooters later in the draft. And it does seem like those types of players might be available when the Jazz are picking both at 5 and at 21.
And the other thing I'll add to that is, the guys then below that they acquire, like Hauser. How big was he for them? Making shots. Cornette was a guy that, really served them well. So it is about finding those pieces that can make your team gel. And I think that's where, Austin's really shined. And I think it's where Danny's great too. And Justin, I feel like this group knows talent. And I saw some good video the other day of Taylor Hendricks knocking shots down, looking lean and mean. Shot looks vastly different mechanically. The coach constantly yelling at him, "Don't twist your shoulder." So it's exciting, some of these guys they've got, and it's going to be fun to watch it all come together.
All right, we talked a little bit about the draft so far, but I want to dive in slightly deeper. This is going to be tough. How would you prioritize if you were to go Ace Bailey, VJ Edgecombe, Trey Johnson, and Con Knipple, as far as what you think the Jazz might value?
Well, I would say in those 4, obviously Ace Bailey's he's got unbelievable upside, but I think there's a lot going on. And I think, the biggest part with him is going to be the interviews and the workouts and, feeling like you could really help him get better. And, so that's one I I think the Jazz, they like that talent. And Danny's always talked about liking unique freakness in guys, which makes Con Knippel seem. I mean, Con Knippel to me is probably a very safe pick and a guy that can acclimate. I don't know about top end. Trey Johnson gets me pretty excited when I see him shooting the ball and making shots. His length, had a great combine. So, and then VJ Edgecombe is, I watched a bunch of Baylor this year. They weren't very good. But in big moments, that guy made big shots. Watched him play here in Provo. He's got an electricity to him. I'll say that. And I think Charlotte probably sees that a little bit, how he fits there. Not sure. And then the real difficulty is you don't know what the Spurs are going to do it too.
Yeah.
Are they going to trade out of there? And somebody comes up there. I mean, obviously, I think Harper's the pick solid at 2, regardless of who gets there. And then I think it's open season. I think it could go a lot of different ways from there.
Longtime coach here in the state. You can hear him on Utah Jazz pre-half and post-game shows. It is Coach Tim LaComb. Coach, thanks for jumping on as always, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Hey, that was fun, and I'm sorry Jake's soft.
Jake's doing all right.
It's a sick call in.
He'll be back. We're happy to give him a day off. All right, thanks, Coach.
No, I'm just kidding. Goodbye.
Talk to you soon. There he is, Coach Tim LaComb, giving us a breakdown on everything with Austin Ainge and the familiarity there. And I do think he's right there, and it's easy to roll your eyes at some of the stuff. And I know Ryan Smith says it a lot, but I think there is kind of an expectation of excellence that comes out of Boston. There is a sheen of a belief that you are supposed to win there, and there's a place that's hung almost 20 banners already that they've had in Boston. There's an expectation that you win, and Austin Ainge has it, and Danny Ainge had it, and Will Hardy had it, and I'm sure Shane Fenske, who's an assistant GM for the Jazz, who's worked in Boston, has it. There's a belief that you are supposed to do things at the highest level, and there's no such thing as kind of just good enough. And you bring that to Utah, and then you've got to mold it to what's possible versus kind of the legacy that Boston has, and you've got to find a way to adapt that and meld the two, and find something that works for Utah with some of that expectation of excellence. And I think that's something the Jazz are still working on and still trying to figure out, because they tried to mimic a little bit of what San Antonio did, and San Antonio had that same professionalism and excellence and consistency that has not turned into a championship for the Utah Jazz. And ironically, I think San Antonio pulled it from Utah and what Jerry Sloan and the Ladens built throughout the 90s here in Utah, and tried to mimic that to turn themselves into a franchise program or a championship program, and they found a way to do it. Now it had to do with finding the star talent in Tim Duncan, and then vice versa. In Boston, it was Kevin Garnett and Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. So it's got to start with the talent and then how you build around it and how you work around it, and that's what the Jazz are still trying to figure out. And they will have the number 5 overall pick to work with to try and find a superstar, whether they make that 5th overall pick, whether they trade it for a star, or try and trade up with a team like San Antonio to get that 2nd overall pick. It's going to be an exciting 3 weeks for Jazz fans, and Austin Ainge is going to be able to prove a lot, I think, over the next couple of weeks, though I thought it was interesting, and maybe we'll be able to pull that clip, but if not, he said on DJ and PK, the overwhelming likelihood is they make those 4 picks. The Jazz have 2 first-rounders, 2 second-rounders. It is hard to make trades. So, Occam's razor, the simplest explanations, the most likely. The Jazz probably end up making these picks, but we'll see. It's going to be a busy couple of weeks and probably fun for a Utah Jazz fan. When we come back, we'll let you hear some clips from Austin Ainge yesterday in his press conference and kind of break down a little bit more of what he said, what I thought, what I heard sitting in the press conference with him. Stick around. More Jake and Ben coming up next, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Accessing. This is Hans Olsen and Scotty G.
Eric Weddle, kind enough to join us. You find out you're up for the College Football Hall of Fame. What's your first thought when you get that phone call?
Just humbled by it all, quite honestly. I think I have a real shot as the College Football Hall of Fame. I don't think I have any shot at the NFL Hall of Fame. So when I look at the College Football Hall of Fame, I think, I belong there at some point, whether it's now or 10 years from now. I think I belong as one of the best college football players to have played the game. So whenever it happens, or if it happens, you guys know me, me, I live life to the fullest. It's not going to change whether I fall asleep at 10 o'clock or midnight. I got many other things that are on my mind. But it's really humbling and truly honored, obviously, and know that it took coaches, players, faculty, family, wife, kids. Like, it doesn't happen alone.
Catch Hanson Scotty weekdays from noon to 3 on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Whether it's the Jazz, Utes, Cougars, or Aggies, these guys have got you covered.
Time to eat, fellas.
You're locked on to Jake Scott and Ben Anderson.
1, 2, 3, move it.
On 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Very happy Tuesday. Ben Anderson rolling solo alongside producer Christian Esparza. We've been talking a lot about Austin Ainge, but it's a big deal. Bringing in a new president of basketball operations is a massive change. And while there's going to be a lot of continuity as far as not bringing in other names and trying to replace the entire staff, you get new eyeballs in, you get somebody who has a different, I don't want to say agenda. The agenda is to win and rebuild this basketball team. We'll let you hear from Austin. It's a new culture, and it brings a different voice in to make the final decision and recommendation to Ryan Smith. I do want to say briefly, one of the things I did gather yesterday is that I get the impression that Justin Zanuck is in for the long haul with the Jazz. And that could change, because you never know what phone call, someone's going to call you up in the middle of work and give you an opportunity, very much like what Ryan Smith revealed yesterday, that he texted Austin. Well, Austin, I think, what did Austin say? He was in a meeting with Brad Stevens? And Ryan was like, hey, can you talk? And he was like, no, but I'll call you. And then called and essentially was like, hey, this job is one we want to fill, and we think you're the guy for the job. And it came together relatively quickly. You just never know what phone call is going to come. So Justin Zanuck very much could get a call from a team that, he's happy to go and run and maybe be a VP of basketball ops or a president of basketball ops and get that opportunity. But I do get the impression that, he's put in a lot of years, put in 2 different stints with the Jazz, well over a decade now. And he's done a lot of this work. A lot of these trades are kind of his doing, his design, that have gotten final approval elsewhere, but were kind of his idea of how to build a roster or how to acquire all these assets. And the Jazz are still, despite the fact that they've made so many draft picks in the last couple of years, still pretty rich with draft capital going forward and young players. I do think, and I would understand why Justin Zanuck would want to see this through. So I would expect Justin to be around. That could change. But again, he has high school age kids, and traditionally, unless you're a player and you're getting traded, if you can stay somewhere in a city and let your kids have a somewhat normal life, I think you see a lot of people favor that in the NBA. So I would expect to see Justin Zanuck around, and his input is weighed heavily, especially when it comes to things like the draft, where Austin Ainge did discuss what the Jazz plans were with their 4 draft picks. This morning he was actually on with DJ and PK. Here's what he had to say.
I mean, I'm going to listen to everything. I just got into this job, so it's all kind of moving fast, PK. But I believe, by far the most likely scenario is we draft the picks. But you never know what offers come in. Got to stay ready.
5th pick is a good pick. It's not as good as the number 1 pick. It's not as good as the 2nd overall pick. I don't know if there's a huge change in the value today of the 3rd pick and the 5th pick. Historically, 3rd pick is much better than the 5th pick because, whoever gets picked 3rd is where talent evaluators at the end of the day have decided is the better player, and that's why they get picked higher, and that's why they have a better chance to pan out and have longer and better careers. But as of now, I don't think there's a very firm understanding of, the guy who's going to be drafted 3rd and why they won't be available at 5. I think as of today, 3 weeks out, there's still a chance that whoever the Jazz may have on the board at 3 right now may be sitting for them at 5 because Philly has a different obligation to their roster to win now than the Jazz do. So maybe they pass on a higher upside player for somebody who's more of a plug and play a la Con Knippel. And then Charlotte, we just don't know. Charlotte's pretty poorly run and has a new front office. So we don't know what direction they're going to head. So the Jazz could very well get a player that they've got ranked higher on their board at 5 than maybe some of these other teams have. And then at 21, somebody's going to slip in the draft and the Jazz will take them. This is not terribly unlike when the Jazz drafted Dante Exum, and you hope you get a much better player than Dante Exum at number 5, and that really was mostly due to Dante's injuries. You see, he's turned into a pretty valuable player with the Dallas Mavericks. But in that same draft, the better player the Jazz ended up selecting was Rodney Hood. And the Jazz got Rodney Hood's 23rd pick, and this was a guy who people thought was going to be maybe a late lottery pick, have an opportunity after a very good year at Duke after transferring from Mississippi State, was a guy who might be able to step in and play for a better team. And he just slipped on draft night because medicals were weird, and the Jazz got access to it because Quinn Snyder was the head coach and knew Duke, and Duke revealed some of the medicals that other teams didn't get. So Rodney Hood fell, and the Jazz were comfortable drafting him and proved that was a good player to grab. And you may see something similar happen here. And it's not uncommon. You know, the Jazz have a history of blowing top 10 picks only to have a better pick in the 20s. And you can go back to Trey Burke at number 9, which was a terrible pick, and a very good pick with Rudy Gobert at number 27. So you hope that's not the case. You'd much rather hit on 5, and what that means when you hit on a player at 5 than, you know, traditionally the value you get at 21. But if you get a future Hall of Famer a la Rudy Gobert out of this draft, you've done a good job, whether you pick them at 5 or 21. Second round picks are interesting. You know, Jake and I talked last week quite a bit about NIL and younger players going back to college and getting fewer freshmen and sophomores in the second round of the NBA draft because you make more guaranteed money now going back and playing at Michigan, going back and playing at, you know, some of these bigger schools as a transfer than you would saying, well, I got to feed my family, I got to take care of my parents, I got to pay off their house, I got to help them retire, whatever it is, and jumping to the NBA for a non-guaranteed contract if you're not going to be picked in the top, 35, 36 spots. Kyle Filipowski got a good contract from the Jazz last year, but he was the second overall pick of the second round. A lot of these guys, once you get into the 40s where the Jazz are drafting 43rd and 53rd, are getting two-way contracts, are getting, that's half of the rookie scale is what you get for a two-way deal. So it's still decent money. It's $1 million, but, a Yaxel Lenenberg who is returning to college to go to Michigan next year might be making $3 million. He might be getting, 3 times, if not more, what he would get in the NBA as a second-round draft pick to go back to college, and that's the type of money we're talking about now if you're an elite, high-level transfer who's going back. So the 43rd pick, the 53rd pick never had a whole lot of value, which I think was an astute point from Jake when we talked about this last week, but may even have a little bit less now, though you're probably looking at older players and maybe somebody who can step in and qualify for the roster, whether that's someone you're going to play in the G League the majority of the time is going to audition for a two-way spot, or maybe someone who just doesn't make it, which is not super uncommon. Some second-round picks simply just don't make it on the roster, and that's not a terribly huge loss, especially when you consider the Jazz, I think, got the 53rd overall pick. I think this was from the Luka trade, right? I think the Jazz got both of these picks in the Luka trade, but they also acquired a second-round pick when they flipped Dennis Schroeder for Kenyon Martin Jr., and my understanding was they basically got it for free. They basically were given a pick for absolutely no value and actually got some money back in the deal because Kenyon Martin was owed less money than Dennis Schroeder, and they got a second-round pick with it. So they were given both money and a second-round draft pick to get off of a player, and they were happy to do that. So the investment is not that high. So I think that's what's worth noting coming up in the draft for the Utah Jazz. All right, back to what Austin Ainge had to say yesterday. The other important part was, why now? I mean, this is teams are operating with their hair on fire, even if they've been in place for a decade in the front office. June is one of the busiest months in the NBA calendar, especially for front offices, and Austin Ainge discussed why this was the time to take the job.
I kind of said, if we're going to do this, now these are big decisions coming up, and if this is something we want to talk about, it now feels like the right time. I
don't think you want to join a team that has drafted somebody at 5 that you did not have at 5 on your board. I don't think if you're Austin Ainge, you want to join the Jazz on June 28th and say, well, why did they pick him? Why did they pick this player? That's not how I want to build a team, and that's not what I think wins, and now I've got to go build a team around this player. And make no mistake, while the Jazz falling to 5 has taken them probably out of the conversation of thinking the guy they're getting is going to be the future face of the franchise, which if you were drafting 1 or 2, Cooper Flagg or Dylan Harper would have been guys that the Jazz would have said, that's the central piece. That's the most valuable piece on the roster, even with Lowry and whoever else in these future draft picks they own. That's the guy to which everything else is going to revolve and every decision is going to be made in relation to them. That is not what you're drafting at 5 anymore. And in fact, I wonder if at number 5, if you're drafting a guy who you think actually will fit with whatever you do next year, and while you don't know who you're going to draft next year or where you're going to be picking in 2026, you think of a guy who's going to most easily fit around any of the players projected to be in the top 3 or 4, the Cam Boozers, the Darren Petersons, the AJ DeBonces. You pick a player who you think would make sense next to them in the future. And with that in mind, you want to have, the right president of basketball operations in place to make that decision. So I get why Austin felt like he wanted to be here. And then, the draft is essentially a trade deadline anymore. There are 2 big trade deadlines, really 3 days in the NBA. In December, when everybody becomes tradable again after signing their contracts in the offseason. February 13th, 14th, whatever it is, when the trade deadline is most years, when players have to be traded before you go into the playoff run. And then, of course, by the draft, because after the draft, while there are still trades, and we see that happen, everyone wants to get things done. Everyone wants to improve their roster. And then by July, you're getting into free agency and it's harder to make trades.
I also take that as a guy with a plan, not so much as why now in this year, 2025. I take it as why now as opposed to next year or the year after, because they were having these conversations, right? And Austin seems like he wants to come here now because he has a plan for what to do this offseason with Lauri Markkanen and some of the other veterans that might need to be moved, because say for whatever reason they don't get moved this year and then he comes over and takes over this job next season, then you're stuck with all these assets that didn't get moved and you feel like you're stuck in a spot. So with Austin joining the team now, he has the chance to kind of take over this roster and do what he wants to do.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. He said there's decisions that need to be made, and that's not just up until June 25th. We've talked about Colin Sexton. We've talked about John Collins. Those guys are on expiring contracts and will be unrestricted free agents next summer. So if they are not retained by the Jazz or traded by the Jazz, there's a high likelihood, or at least a reasonable likelihood, that they go elsewhere in free agency for no value, and then you're left with nothing. So Austin Ainge gets to step in and make some decisions on that and have influence there. And look, John Collins could opt out of his contract still. John Collins could absolutely say, hey, I want to be a free agent. I don't want to come back to Utah next year, though I think he's liked being in Utah, and he's certainly happy about making $26.5 million next season. And I would expect him to opt in. I guess there's still a chance that might not happen, though. We'll see. We will know about that before the end of the month. The other interesting thing here with Austin Ainge, and this might hurt Jazz fans a little bit more, is he's been running a championship team and a team that's been competing for the finals. They've made 2 finals, somewhat under his watch, including last year winning it all, but their loss to the Warriors and whatever that was, 2019 or 2021, whenever it was. He will have a pain tolerance for a losing season because he hasn't had to deal with losing seasons. This year was certainly disappointing for Boston, but we didn't know it was disappointing until Jason Tatum tore his Achilles in Game 5 of their series against the Knicks. Otherwise, it still felt like they had a chance to come back in that series and win the title and be a favorite certainly to get out of the East and beat Indiana if they would have met them in the conference finals. So he may have a willingness to go through another bad season, a quote-unquote rebuilding year, because he has not had to live it in Boston at all. Whereas, we're now entering year 4 for the Jazz of this rebuild. You had 2022, 23, 23, 24, 24, 25, which is this past season. Now you're going to go into year 4. And while Jazz fans may be tired of it, maybe even, ownership, members of the front office may be tired of this cycle, Austin Ainge won't be, because he's not had to deal with it. He's not had to bear that weight. He's not had to get the negative feedback. He's not had to take, some of the blame for that. And I think that's advantageous for him. And in truth, might be the best thing for the team long term if you still think you've got to get a top 5 pick next year, and those players that are projected to be available are true star number 1 pieces, which is the talking point, which will change, and we'll learn more of the players' warts as we do every year. But that could be long-term advantageous for the Jazz, even if it means more short-term pain. But he's willing to take that on because he hasn't had to deal with it to this point in his career. Along those lines, let's look at what he had to say about taking over a team that is in a rebuild.
Well, I'm learning a little bit how they did things in the past, but there's a lot of ways you can execute it, but mostly it's just making a lot of good decisions over and over and over, right? 2 ways: second-round picks, first-round picks, trades, free agency. It's just making good decisions, stacking up good players, so you have more to work with. That's really the job. And so whether you're in the middle, the beginning, or the end of building a team, that's what you're doing every day, trying to make good decisions. And so that's what we'll try to do.
I do think you even get a sense of a guy who's been running a championship team when he talks about, and he's right. He's not wrong about what's happening with the Jazz. But when you're talking about two-way players and you're talking about second-round draft picks, like right now, those are so low on the priority list for the Jazz. You know, they need to hit on the top 5 pick, and then they need to figure out exactly what to do with Lauri Markkanen, and then they need to figure out exactly what to do with John Collins and Colin Sexton. And then they've got to figure out, what does Taylor Hendricks look like? So while championship teams are closer and you have fewer questions about what to do with Jason Tatum and what to do with Jaylen Brown, obviously before their injuries, and you are more worried about some of those fringe pieces, I think that's probably just kind of naturally baked into who you are when you're Austin Ainge, because that's where your head has been, and that's where the flexibility on your roster has been. And Boston's done a good job with it, but it will come back to Utah now, and it's the inverse. The second-round pick, you might have the best second-round pick. Well, not best because that's Nikola Jokic. Let's say two-way contract player. The best two-way contract player in the NBA doesn't change anything for the Jazz. You could go out and get the best guy out there who's ready to step in and maybe sign a long-term NBA deal or a true NBA deal that gives you 2 years and $6 million, $8 million, which would be the best two-way player right now. That's not super impactful for the Jazz. So that's not to say that what Austin Ainge said was wrong there. He's right. You got to stack good decisions and continually make them and continue to make moves in the right direction. That's how you get back to competing. But I just think that's kind of the natural built-in where his head has had to be as far as what his day-to-day job was. And now it's coming back and looking at the top of the roster and trying to figure out how to get those pieces in place so you have your own Jason Tatum and you have your own Jaylen Brown and some players to build around so you can get back to that place where you're competing for a championship. That's going to be his job, and that's a lot of work. He's got his work cut out for him. The Jazz certainly have a rich collection of pieces to move around and play with, draft picks, future unprotected picks from other teams, their own picks, to build that championship, but that's easier said than done, and I'm curious to see his approach, and we'll get to know a lot more about it coming up in the next 3 weeks. All right, we'll wrap up the show. Coming up next, stick around, more Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Hey, bro. You hear us every day with our crazy opinions.
Hey, what you doing?
Well, now, it's time to hear from you.
Hey, great show.
Download the KSL Sports app and fire off your thoughts with the call-in tab on the bottom of your screen.
Your show is fantastic. It's the one that captivates me the most.
You can tell PK to stop singing.
G-Bangs! G-Bangs!
Let Jake and Ben know what you really think of the Jazz. Woo! Tell Hans and Scotty about your favorite barbecue spot or what color of tie JJ should be wearing on TV. The best entries will be played on the air. Download the KSL Sports app now and hit the call-in button to let your voice be heard.
I think you guys do an incredible job.
This is 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. The sports you love, the teams you can't live without.
Get a sense of urgency!
This is Jake Scott and Ben Anderson on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Two amigos on the airwaves, talking sports. They got him and Jason also loves this tie guy.
Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Rolling solo today, Ben Anderson. A clip on Twitter yesterday I found that I wanted to play. I thought was interesting, because he didn't talk a whole lot, mostly because he wasn't in our country for a while. But Jimmer Fredette, having retired from international basketball and his playing career overall, was on with Andy Katz and kind of talked about how well-positioned BYU Athletics is with their NIL and AJ DeBonsa. This clip was from Andy Katz yesterday on Twitter. I wanted to let you hear it.
Man, they're really well positioned right now. They really are. Football and basketball, all their programs at BYU are actually doing really well. It's fun to see. They just had an AD change. My guy Brian Santiago is now the AD at BYU, and Tom did such an amazing job putting this program where it is today. Kevin Young is awesome. He's just a great coach. He's a great dude. He's got those guys working hard. He's got a professional system that he's running, and that's why you see all these high and type talent players that want to come and be in that system, because he's running it just like a pro system would. And that's what these guys want. They're getting pitched, hey, come develop for a year or longer if you want to, and then go pursue your dreams in the NBA. And then the other guys can stay and continue to build that culture. But they're exciting. They're exciting. It's exciting times to be a BYU fan. AJ's obviously amazing. They got Wright and all these other guys to be super pumped about as well. Richie came back. And now there's a lot of expectation though, right? Everyone's talking about him. We haven't really been in that position before where everyone's talking about you from the beginning of the year, thinking that this is a Final Four potential team. Because of that, it's going to be a lot of fun. There'll be a lot of media. And then it's about going out there and reaching expectations or exceeding expectations. And I think they can do it. I think they have the wherewithal and the players to do it. I'm just excited to watch.
First of all, I just like hearing Jimmer around. Jimmer was such a critical piece of basketball in the state of Utah, over the last 15 years, and what he meant to college basketball in the state as a beacon. Specifically for BYU, Utah's had some good teams here and there, but what he meant as a star for college basketball here locally, it's nice to have him come out of his shell a little bit and be a little bit more available for interviews. I know he's on DJ and PK a couple of weeks ago as well. He was on with JJ and Alex last year at the Big 12 Media Days, so it's been fun to hear him around. I think that would be beneficial. I'll be curious what his future relationship with BYU looks like and the media. But he's right, and I think the most important part there that he circled is the expectation for BYU when you have so much makeover on your roster, even if you have Keba Keita and Richie Saunders coming back and some familiar faces, when you bring in a player like AJ DeBonsa and you have Wright coming in from Baylor, who are going to get the majority of the touches and make a lot of the decisions, and it's going to be based around them, which is, you're talking about a freshman and a sophomore, it's going to change a lot, and college teams are going to have BYU circled, and BYU's playing a gauntlet of really good teams early in the year in their non-conference schedule, and then it doesn't get easier because you get into the Big 12, because the Big 12 is one of the best, if not the best, conferences in college basketball year after year. So I'm really excited to see how this plays out for BYU. I think it's a totally different environment than they've been in, and it's going to be a challenge. They're going to be battle-tested by the time they get to the conference title race, and once they get into the conference tournament, and then if they can make the NCAA tournament, I think they'll be well positioned to compete if they've stayed healthy throughout the season. Big thanks, Christian, doing as much work as he did today with Jake out. Expect to have Jake back. We'll also have our Radiothon raising money tomorrow for primary children. So excited for that. But to stick around, Hans and Scotty coming up next, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.